Since the days the black body was seen as property, dehumanized, animalized, and presented as commodity, from state-sanctioned wars on blacks to multiple fatalities, from chains to Jim Crow to police brutality. Ladies and gentlemen, this is something we can't deny. Something over the course of this country that is often justified. And when you denounce Black Lives Matter to pacify, the problem with police brutality only magnifies. It was 16 shots before Laquan McDonald's body hit that ground. And with the absence of empathy, you will sit in this crowd with the same look you got right now. Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, Brian Davis. Let me explain the last thing for you so you can get a context of what happened when I was in the 8th grade. So me and my friends, we loved to play basketball after school. So we signed up for a tournament in Lower Merion, which is a suburban area right outside of Philadelphia. So over the course of this journey to Lower Merion, we see this cop drive past us about 15 times. And on the 16th time around, this cop, he stops us. He says, "Where you kids headed?" I was like confused for a second, because I'm like, we all got basketballs in our hand, we all dribbling, so obviously we're going to the courts. So immediately after that, I say, "Sir, we're going to play basketball." And he says, "Okay, well, we don't need any chaos or ruckus in this community, and if you're not of age, you got to leave when the curfew hits or I have to arrest you." I was like, "Damn, I'm only 14, like, just relax." So immediately after that, the cop just drove off, and we now walk into the courts. But I noticed something so different. There were parents telling their children to come inside, but there were also people repeatedly locking their car doors. I realized that we represented a threat at this point, and that the police officer wasn't there to protect me, he was there to protect the community from me. So once we got to the courts, the same police officer that was following us, he was waiting at the courts for us, but it was time to play basketball. So my brother Brandon was our point guard. He was very small, very fast with the rock, and he was really good at no-look passes. His role was just to assist each of us the ball. Now Damon, he was our shooting guard. Damon could shoot from California and make a shot in State College. He had a Steph Curry shot. So his role was just to make points. I was the small forward. The same size that I am today, I was the same size in the 8th grade. So people used to call me Brock Lesnar because I was so big. So my role was just to aggressively attack the basket to draw a foul. Now, Raheem was our power forward. Because he was so good at close-range shots and mid-range shots, his role was just to stay as close to the basket as possible. Now, Mike, also known as Sasquatch, was our center. Mike was 6'4" in the 8th grade. His role was just to get our rebounds and our putbacks and ultimately always be there whenever we missed shots. But because we were playing basketball in Lower Merion, things were a little bit different. It was more privileged over there, so we had a coach. Our coach designed our offensive plays and defensive plays and ultimately created our system for the game. Now, like any official basketball game, there's referees. Those referees decided what calls were good, what calls were bad, and ultimately decided when the contact between two players, whether that was a foul or not. But because Lower Merion was so privileged, the game had game announcers as well. The game announcers, they described the game event by event, and they actually provided us with action replays. Yes, they had action replays. Now, Damon's dad was our equipment manager. He bought us 3-star jerseys from Walmart, and he also bought all of us a pair of Jordans. And it was time to ball. But let's fast forward 7 years later. I'm no longer on the privileged course of Lower Merion. I'm in a more privileged place in my dorm here at Penn State. And I noticed something so intriguing when I was watching a basketball game between the Cavaliers and the Knicks. Now, not just the fact that the Cavaliers were blowing out the Knicks, but I saw something so intriguing, something that I didn't see when I was playing basketball in the 8th grade. I realized with basketball, with its rituals and positions, and that system can be used to explain another system. That system is police brutality. So I realized that the point guard in police brutality is officer number 2, who assists officer number 1, the shooting guard, in the killing of a black person. Now we have to be clear about police brutality. We have to change our view. We have to understand that when a person makes a shot in basketball, they make a point. But if they make a shot in police brutality, another black person is killed. And we also have to understand that the rim of the basketball is the community. Now, just like myself in the 8th grade, just bulldozer into the basket trying to get a foul, the small forward in the lens of police brutality is the prejudice and implicit bias police officers have. Because of the preconceived notions that police officers have prior to engaging blacks, this sets a premise for a change in behavior, a change in body language, but also a change in the tone of the voice of the officer, ultimately escalating the situation. Now, just like Raheem, he had to stay as close to the basket as possible because he was our power forward. Our power forward in the lens of police brutality is the over-policing and over-surveillance of communities of color. Y'all remember Mike Sasquatch? He was always responsible for getting our rebounds and our putbacks. So our center in the lens of police brutality is our fail-safe mechanism, which means that if anything goes wrong when a police officer kills a black, it's always something there to protect and justify them of the heinous act. But those are just the players. They got to run plays, right? They need a coach. The coach in police brutality is white supremacy. White supremacy creates the system for police officers to kill blacks with impunity and be vindicated of this act. Now, just like any regular basketball game that's official, there's referees. So the referees in basketball, they decide whether the contact between two players is a foul or not. So our referees in police brutality will have to be our district attorneys who decide whether they want to prosecute an officer or not. Now, just like in Lower Merion, they had game announcers describing the game event by event and providing us with action replays, those replays being the dunks. Police brutality also has game announcers as well. Those are our media outlets. So our media outlets, they report from a yellow journalistic perspective, ultimately exaggerating every situation. But the replays in basketball are the videos of people being dunked on. But the replays in police brutality are the replays of blacks being killed by the police. Now, can anybody in here imagine getting dunked on by LeBron James? How would that be? Like, if LeBron James dunked on me, wouldn't y'all jump out of y'all seats? So dunking has changed the game of basketball. Dunking is targeted, it's naturally aggressive, and it's blatant. It's so electrifying that y'all would jump out of y'all seats if y'all saw LeBron James dunk on me. But when communities of color are dunked on by the police, this causes the public to jump out of their homes and protest and advocate for change. Now, just like Damon's dad bought us those jerseys and those Jordans for the game, police brutality also has an equipment manager. That's the Department of Defense. So the Department of Defense initiated this program called 1033, which gave all police departments in the world a surplus of military-grade equipment. Now, I was just thinking, if we militarize a police department, we militarize a police officer. Now, I come from a military family, and I understand that when you're in the military, you're conditioned to seek an order. You don't see color. So maybe that would explain why Laquan McDonald can get shot 16 times by a police officer in less than 16 seconds. Or maybe that would explain why Walter Scott can get shot 8 times running away from a police officer. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the system. We're at a university full of scholars, top researchers, and amazing faculty. How do we solve this complex problem? In math, to use our order of operations, we have something called PEMDAS, or please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, right? But in police brutality, we also have a PEMDAS as well. PEMDAS now becomes police and people engaged in mitigating ways to de-escalate adverse situations. Let's take a look. So the first thing that we need is racial competency training. We need police officers to understand why blacks are fearing for their lives and why blacks are running, and ultimately, they need to understand that I don't need to be Kobe Bryant to play basketball in Lower Merion. We need community-led police engagement training. The community has to teach the police how to police the community. We can't just expect lions to go to the North Pole and police the polar bears, and they don't know anything about the environment, but the polar bears can teach the lions how to adapt to the environment. The next thing that we need, which is very important, is more female police officers. Studies show in regards to women's approach in policing that they are less authoritative, they use less physical force, and are far greater communicators than male police officers. Now, reflecting back on the 8th grade, I remember when our opponents heard these strategies and they called a timeout. So a timeout in basketball is a chance for teams to rejuvenate, to strategize, and ultimately huddle up and discuss the game. But a timeout in the lens of police brutality is the initial moment every officer of the law understood the reality of police brutality. So I remember in 8th grade, I was huddled up with Damon, Raheem, Mike, and Brandon, and we just discussing the game. We're like, yo, the game's about to end soon. What are we gonna do? And Raheem kept, yo, Brian, they talking trash, they talking trash. I'm like, yo, relax. They're not gonna win with ignorance. But Raheem didn't understand what I meant by that. So I told him that ignorance was information gathered to normalize oppression rendered against non-white citizens of Earth. He still was confused. So I told him that ignorance was saying things like, what about black on black crime? We're going to debunk that today because studies show that 90% of blacks are killed by other blacks. But studies also show that 83% of whites are killed by other whites. But what they don't tell you is that the white population in America is 5 times greater than the black population in America. Ignorance is also thinking that when I'm talking about blacks being killed by the police, that I'm not talking about that black woman also. Another form of ignorance is thinking that when we're talking about police brutality, that it's only in America. When I was in Australia talking to my Aboriginal brothers, they were telling me how blacks were dying in police custody, how blacks were being aggressively beaten by the police. Now, once I was finished telling Raheem that, the referee came over to us and said it was 5 seconds left in the game. This is our last chance to make a substitution. So at this point, I'm looking around the huddle. I'm looking at Brandon. So Brandon's very fatigued. He's out of breath. Damon's wrist is sore from shooting so much, and Mike has a bruised shoulder. So I'm like, yo, y'all gonna quit now? Look at the scoreboard. They made too many shots already. Walter Scott, shot. Michael Brown, shot. Philando Castile, shot. Rakia Boyd, shot. Y'all can't quit on me now. But once they decided that they weren't getting back in the game, I understood this is our last chance to take a stance. And with them not getting back in the game and looking at the rest of the bench and nobody's left, I had to look to the stands. So I told the fans, listen, we up against police brutality. We up against white supremacy. We up against officers assisting in killing blacks. We up against the Department of Defense. We up against prejudice. These are our opponents. We up against the whole system. This is just basketball. Police brutality isn't a sport. By show of hands in this room, with 5 seconds left in the game, how many people could I recruit to the court? Now, if you raised your hand, that means that you're not scared to answer this call. So put your sneakers on and let's play ball. Thank you.